So, what does your body have to do with your anxiety, with your depression, with your PTSD and trauma symptoms, relationship problems, or addictive behaviors? In short, what does your body have to do with your mental health? The answer is everything. If you have any of those conditions that I just mentioned, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to find this video very useful. I know it's on the long side, but stick around, it's going to be worthwhile. Okay, so we give a version of this to all of our patients. We train graduate students to work with it. And in fact, MAPS, the nonprofit pharmaceutical company that's running the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trials, is using this as one of their training resources for their clinicians for MDMA assisted psychotherapy. Okay? Having said that, I want you to imagine this scenario. Right? That you're driving down the road and it's a wintry day and it's snowing outside, or if you live someplace where it doesn't snow, it's raining outside a lot, right? So you're driving down the road, you're listening to your radio, you're relaxed, everything's okay, right? Until we hit that patch of ice, or you hit the puddle, right? And you feel that the car's slipping a little bit, you're losing control, where the steering wheel doesn't have much connection to the road. So we all know this moment, and when that happens, you get tight, right? You're no longer listening to the radio, you become hyper-focused on the road, you grip the steering wheel, you can feel your heart thumping in your chest, your shoulders are tight, your neck's tight, your breathing is fast, and adrenaline just got released into your system. And this all happens in a fraction of a second. Right? This is a reaction that you didn't control, you didn't choreograph in any way. It's just something that your body does, it turns on and it takes over, right? And thankfully it does take over, because you're about to lose control of the car, and your body, your autonomic nervous system takes over and makes you sort of prepare to deal with that situation, right? So this is the area that we're going to be talking about, the relationship between threats in your environment and your anxiety, your depression, your PTSD symptoms, things like this. There's a profound connection here that we're going to go into, right? So this is the first point here, right? That many mental health symptoms are actually adaptive survival responses to threats, okay? Or I'll put it this way, they at one point were adaptive survival responses to threats. They may not be serving you anymore, or you may not even know where they came from, where they got generated, but they made sense at one point in a particular context. And that context is one of threat, right? So our key point here is that threat equals activation of your autonomic nervous system. Right? The greater the threat, the greater the real or perceived threat, the greater your autonomic nervous system response. And so before we sort of start mapping this out, I want to give you a working definition of what the autonomic nervous system is, right? So right now you are listening to this video lecture and your mind is trying to understand the concepts, you're trying to figure out what theories I'm presenting here. But at the same time, your heart is beating, right? At the same time, your blood pressure is being regulated. At the same time, the amount of oxygen in your blood is being regulated. If you just ate some food, your body is digesting that food, right? Even how dilated your eyeball is relative to the amount of light in the room that you're in right now is being regulated for you, right? So basically, there are hundreds and hundreds of these automatic physiological functions that are going on inside of you right now that you're not in charge of, that you're not even aware of. They're just happening automatically in your system. Hence, they are part of your autonomic nervous system, right? All these things are happening beyond your volitional control, right? And guys, just think about this for a moment. Think about what it takes, the level of complex machinery it takes for you to be sitting there watching this video, right? There's all these things going on inside of you that you don't think about at all. for you to just to be sitting there, right? And if one of those things went off kilter, you would know about it. It would reach your conscious attention. So just take that in, how brilliant this machinery is that is operating invisibly right now, okay? So for a conversation on mental health, we are primarily concerned with two sub-branches of the autonomic nervous system. The first one is called the the first one is called the sympathetic nervous system that we're going to go into. And the sympathetic nervous system handles fight or flight responses, right? It handles that feeling of dread, anxiety, fear, adrenaline, things like that, right? When your system has to ramp up to deal with a situation, that is a sympathetic nervous system response. Now, the flip side of the coin is something called the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So this handles calming responses. Sleep is a parasympathetic response. Digestion is a parasympathetic response, right? So they're very healthy parasympathetic responses that we use all the time. Our rest and recovery, right? This is parasympathetic. Now, again, for a conversation on mental health, the pieces that we're focusing on are depression, dissociation, numbing, right? All of these are also parasympathetic responses, which you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I thought my depression, I thought these feeling states originate in my thoughts. And, to some degree they might, but the suggestion here, what we're asking you to take a look at is, in fact, that things like depression and anxiety and fear are actually, they are experiences that are generated by the autonomic nervous system, okay? So the big takeaway from this is precisely that there's a whole lot of your experience, there's a whole lot of your mood, your emotional world that gets generated by this seamless, invisible layer of machinery that's operating below the surface of your consciousness, right? It's happening all at this autonomic level, right? A whole heck of a lot of your experience being in the world is autonomic in nature. The last thing I want to say about the autonomic nervous system is that it's not uniquely human. We're talking about the mammalian nervous system, not something that's distinct to us. We share this part of how our brains and our bodies are organized and the structure within us. We share that with all other mammals. We can see that, everybody on this page, the mouse, the deer, they all have the same reactions to feeling threatened, to being overwhelmed, to being stressed that we do, right? Now, we do something very unique. We go off and make meaning of the experience, right? We tell stories. We have this ego that that is formed through this process, and we have complex thinking. So that is distinctly human. There's no doubt about that. But the mental health symptoms that we're talking about here that come out of threat are fundamentally what are known as bottom-up responses. They are emerging from our biology, and because this mouse on this page does not have higher order cognitive capacities. It doesn't make meaning of its experience. It doesn't tell stories, and yet it has the same basic nervous system responses that we do. Okay, so that's just that's a big takeaway from this piece right now about the autonomic nervous system, and this is why talk therapy or therapies that have what we call top-down approaches, where they're trying to, calm or work with the reactivity of these symptoms by working with your thoughts or reality testing or being rational. This is why those approaches we feel are not so effective, because fundamentally they're not emanating, the nervous system responses, symptoms are not coming from the more distinctly human parts of the brain. They're coming from the more primitive biology. Okay, so let's go back to that example of driving in the car and it's raining out, or it's snowing out and you hit the ice. So if we want to put that experience on a map, it looks something like this, right? So basically what we have here is threat level on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have your body's response to it. And that point 0 there, that represents calm and awake, right? It represents a state of no threat, no activation, everything's just okay, right? You're chilling at state 0. Anything that you perceive as threatening, either currently or in your past, shows up on that x-axis. We can put anything on that x-axis, like car accidents. We can put, being shot at in a war. If you're a soldier, those are the big ones that we think of. The things that we don't typically think of that should be on that x-axis are things that happen to us, particularly in early childhood, right? So things like, if you grew up in a family with an alcoholic parent, or a chaotic family, or there was a lot of stress, or abandonment or neglect going on, right? These are things that will profoundly shape us. Anything can fit into that. In fact, think about it this way. Think about walking down the street, right? And you're on your phone, you're just talking, and you trip, right? So think about that moment of tripping and what your body does to prevent you from falling, right? So in this case, the threat is, you're about to wipe out on the road, right? So your body goes into high gear, again, just like it did in the car driving example. Your body goes in high gear to catch you. So your legs get tight, your core muscles get tight, your arms might come out like this, your head and neck may pull back. And this is all to prevent, your body is sort of, taking over again to prevent you from falling and injuring yourself, and particularly from having a head injury, right? So again, think about the brilliance of that reaction that happens all in a fraction of a second, right? So this is what's called the fast brain. This is this is the more primitive part of your brain, your brain stem that is kicking in to catch you, right? If you had to sit there and think about it, if you had to sit there and say, boy, I'm tripping, I better put my arms out, I better do this, I better do that. If you had to choreograph catching yourself in the middle of a fall like that, you would fall every time, right? We can barely build robots at this point that have that kind of balance built into their systems. And yet we have this primitive part of our brain structure, all mammals have it, by the way, that prevent them from, that kicks into gear whenever a threat shows up. This is a system that's there, it's for your benefit, it's evolutionary in nature, and it turns on every time you feel threatened and you don't have a say in it, right? You don't have a say whether your body's gonna catch you after you trip, it just does. You're no longer on that cell phone call.